When the Alpha King's boat capsized in the forbidden waters, lighthouse keeper Petra Halford faced an impossible choice: obey the royal decree that had imprisoned her for 6 years, or save the life of the man who'd left her to rot in isolation. She chose defiance, and what happened next would shake the foundation of the kingdom itself. If you want to see how one woman's courage brought a king to his knees, stay until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. The wind screamed like a dying animal. Petra Halford pressed her calloused palm against the cold glass of the lighthouse window, watching the sea transform into something monstrous. White-capped waves rose 30 feet high, slamming against the jagged rocks that had claimed so many ships before she'd taken this post. Before the decree. Before everything had turned to ash and isolation. 6 years. 6 goddamned years! She turned from the window, her boots echoing on the iron stairs as she began her nightly ascent. The lighthouse groaned around her, a skeletal giant that had become her only companion on this forsaken stretch of coastline. 247 steps. She'd counted them so many times she could climb them in her sleep, and sometimes she did, jerking awake on the landing with no memory of how she'd gotten there. The lamp room waited at the top, its massive Fresnel lens catching the last dying light of day. Petra moved through the ritual with practiced efficiency, checking the oil reservoir, adjusting the wick, preparing to light the beacon that would burn through the night. The storm was coming fast now. She could smell it in the air, that electric tang that made her teeth ache and her scars itch. They'd laughed at her when she'd volunteered for this posting. A woman? Captain Morris had sneered, his tobacco-stained teeth showing in what he probably thought was a smile. Alone on the forbidden coast? You'll lose your mind in a month. Better than losing it in your company, she'd shot back, and the other sailors had roared with laughter. Morris's face had gone purple, but he'd approved her application, probably hoping she'd fail. Probably hoping she'd come crawling back, broken and begging. She'd been here 72 months. She wasn't broken yet. Petra struck the match, touching it to the wick. The flame caught, grew, and the lens began to turn, sending its beam out across the churning waters. Her beacon. Her purpose. The only thing standing between dozens of ships and the rocks that would tear them apart. That's when she saw it. At first she thought it was debris, a piece of driftwood, maybe part of a broken mast. But then the lightning flashed, and in that brief moment of brilliance, she saw the truth. A boat, a small rowboat, barely more than a dinghy, fighting against waves that should have swallowed it whole. And inside, a single figure, pulling at the oars with desperate strength. "No," Petra whispered. "No, you absolute fool." No one came to the Forbidden Coast. That was the whole point of the decree. After the territory wars had ended, King Idris Lockmore himself had sealed this entire stretch of shoreline. No fishing, no shipping, no landing of any kind. The penalty for violation was imprisonment, confiscation of vessel and cargo, and if the crown was feeling particularly vindictive, exile to the work camps in the northern wastes. Petra had been assigned here precisely because no one was supposed to come. She was meant to tend the light, protect ships that pass by at a distance, and otherwise exist in splendid mandated isolation. The government ship came once every 3 months with supplies, stayed exactly 90 minutes, and departed without ceremony. That was the extent of her human contact. And yet, here was this idiot, rowing straight toward the most dangerous landing on the entire coast, in the middle of what was shaping up to be the worst storm of the season. Petra's hands clenched on the railing. It wasn't her problem. The decree was clear. If someone was stupid enough to violate it, they deserved whatever happened to them. She should stay here, tend her light, and let nature take its course. She made it down 15 steps before her conscience caught up with her pride. "Damn it!" The words echoed in the lighthouse's hollow core as she spun around, grabbing the emergency pack she kept by the door. Rope, knife, signal flares, a waterproof lantern. She threw on her oilskin coat, jammed a wool cap over her short-cropped dark hair, and plunged out into the storm. The wind hit her like a fist, nearly knocking her off her feet. Rain slashed horizontally, stinging any exposed skin. Petra lowered her head and pushed forward, following the narrow path that wound down from the lighthouse to the beach. She'd walked it 1,000 times, knew every rock and route, but the storm turned it treacherous. Twice she slipped, catching herself on the guide rope she'd installed years ago. By the time she reached the beach, she was soaked through despite the oilskin. The ocean was a roiling mass of fury, foam, and spray, mixing with the rain until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. The lighthouse beam swept overhead, and in its light, she caught another glimpse of the boat. Closer now, much closer. And capsizing, Petra saw the wave coming, a monster, easily 40 feet high, its crest already starting to curl. The person in the boat saw it too. She could see them abandon the oars, grabbing instead for the gunwales, bracing for impact. The wave hit like the hand of an angry god. The boat flipped, end over end, and the figure was thrown into the churning water. Petra didn't think. She kicked off her boots, dropped the emergency pack, and waded into the surf. The cold was shocking, driving the air from her lungs. The undertow grabbed at her legs, trying to pull her down, pull her out, pull her under. She was a strong swimmer. Growing up in the coastal town of Mariner's Rest, she'd spent half her childhood in the water. But this wasn't swimming, this was survival. Every stroke was a battle, every breath a victory. There! A flash of pale skin, an arm breaking the surface. Petra dove, kicking hard, reaching out. Her fingers closed on fabric, a shirt, a coat, something. She pulled, yanking the person toward her, getting an arm around their chest. They weren't fighting her. That was either very good or very bad. She turned, trying to orient herself toward shore, but another wave crashed over them both. Water filled her mouth, her nose. She held on, refusing to let go, kicking toward where she thought the beach should be. Her foot hit sand. Sobbing with effort, Petra dragged her burden through the shallows. The person was heavy, dead weight, possibly literally. She got them to dry sand and rolled them onto their back, immediately checking for breathing. Nothing. "Don't you dare," she snarled, tilting their head back, checking the airway. Water gushed out. She turned them on their side, pounding on their back, and more water came up. "Don't you dare die on my beach, you understand me?" She started compressions, counting in her head. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. "Come on," she shouted over the storm. "Come on, damn you!" The person convulsed, vomiting up what seemed like half the ocean. Petra rolled them back on their side, holding them steady as they choked and gasped. Finally, blessedly, they sucked in a ragged breath. "That's it," Petra said, her voice gentler now. "Breathe. Just breathe." The lighthouse beam swept over them again, and in its light, Petra got her first good look at who she'd saved. A man. Probably in his 30s, with dark hair plastered to his skull, and a strong-jawed face currently contorted with the effort of breathing. He wore expensive clothes, she could tell that much even soaked and torn as they were. Fine wool, quality stitching, not the garb of a common sailor or fisherman. His eyes opened. They were gold. Pure, impossible gold, like sunlight on wheat, like honey held up to the light. And they were looking at her with an intensity that made her forget, just for a moment, that she was kneeling in the sand in the middle of a hurricane. "You," he rasped, his voice rough from salt water. "You saved me." "Don't thank me yet," Petra said curtly, getting her arms under his shoulders. "We need to get to shelter before we both die of exposure. Can you stand?" He tried, got about halfway up before his legs buckled. Petra caught him, grunting under his weight. "Wonderful," she muttered. "Just wonderful." Half carrying, half dragging him, she made her way back up the path to the lighthouse. It took 3 times as long as her descent, and by the time she shouldered through the door, her muscles were screaming. She lowered him onto the bench just inside the entrance, then slumped against the wall, gasping. For a long moment, the only sounds were the storm outside and their labored breathing inside. "Thank you," the man said finally. His voice was stronger now, though still rough. "I owe you my life." "You owe me an explanation," Petra shot back, pushing off the wall. "What the hell were you thinking, coming to the Forbidden Coast in a rowboat during a storm?" He looked at her for a long moment, those strange gold eyes unreadable. Then, impossibly, he smiled. "Would you believe me if I said I was coming to see you?" Petra stared at him. "No." "Pity," he coughed, grimacing. "Because it's true. Nobody comes to see me. That's the point of the decree. I'm here to tend the light, not entertain visitors who are too stupid to check the weather before they go rowing." "The weather was fine when I left." "When you left from where?" He hesitated, and Petra saw something flicker across his face. Uncertainty? Fear? It was gone before she could name it. The mainland, he said finally. Port Severin. Petra's blood went cold. Port Severin was the capital, and it was 40 miles away across open ocean. You rowed 40 miles in a dinghy, she said slowly. I did. To see me. A lighthouse keeper you've never met. Yes. You're insane. Quite possibly. He tried to stand again and this time managed it, though he had to brace himself against the wall. But I'm also very determined. Petra grabbed the emergency pack she'd dropped by the door. Sit down before you fall down. I need to check you for hypothermia and injuries. I'm fine. You nearly drowned 5 minutes ago. You're not fine. Sit. There was enough command in her voice that he actually obeyed, sinking back onto the bench. Petra pulled out the medical kit, checking his pupils, his pulse, the temperature of his skin. He was cold, too cold, but not dangerously so. Not yet. Out of those wet clothes, she ordered. Now. I don't care about your modesty. You're going into shock. Strip, or I'll do it for you. He laughed, the sound startling in the enclosed space. You're very bossy. I'm very practical. Clothes? Off. He complied, though his fingers fumbled with the buttons. Petra helped, her movements brisk and clinical. She'd seen men in various states of undress before, hard to avoid when you'd spent your youth around sailors. This was no different. Except it was. His body was a map of scars, old wounds, healed but still visible. Sword cuts, claw marks, 4 parallel lines across his ribs that could only have come from a shifter, and on his left shoulder a brand in the shape of a crown. Petra's hand stilled. You're military, she said quietly. We're military. An officer. Something like that. He didn't look at her, focusing instead on getting his shirt off. Petra retrieved a blanket from the supply closet, wrapping it around his shoulders. Then another, and another, until he was cocooned in wool. Stay here, she said. I need to check the light. Wait! His hand shot out, catching her wrist. The touch was warm despite everything, his fingers strong. Please, just stay for a moment. Petra looked down at where he held her, then up at his face. In the lamplight, she could see exhaustion etched into every line, a weariness that went deeper than physical. Who are you? She asked. He let go of her wrist, but his eyes held hers. Someone who's made a terrible mistake, he said, and I'm hoping you'll let me make it right. Before Petra could respond, the lighthouse groaned, a deep, shuddering sound that vibrated through the stone. She looked up, her keeper's instincts screaming alarm. The light! She bolted for the stairs, taking them 3 at a time. Behind her, she heard him shout something, but she was already gone, racing up the spiral. The storm must have damaged something, or the wind had gotten too strong, or... She burst into the lamp room and stopped dead. The light was fine. The lens turned smoothly, the beam sweeping out across the dark sea. But written in the condensation on the glass, in a hand she didn't recognize, were 4 words. I know who he is. Petra spun around, but the lamp room was empty. The only access was the stairs she'd just climbed. There was no one else here. No one else could be here. She looked back at the words. Even as she watched, they began to fade, the condensation evaporating in the heat from the lamp. I know who he is. A chill ran down Petra's spine that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. She descended slowly, her mind racing. When she reached the ground floor, the man was where she'd left him, huddled in his blankets, looking for all the world like a half-drowned cat. Everything all right? He asked. Petra studied him, really studied him. The expensive clothes, the military bearing despite his exhaustion, the crown brand on his shoulder, those impossible gold eyes that seemed to catch and hold light like a cat's, like a shifter's. Tell me something, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Why would someone row 40 miles in a storm to see a lighthouse keeper on the Forbidden Coast? He met her gaze steadily. Because 6 years ago, I signed a decree without reading it properly. I sealed this coastline, and I forgot that there was someone stationed here. I forgot about you. The air seemed to leave the room. You, Petra whispered. You're the one who... Yes. He stood, letting the blankets fall away. Despite his state of undress, he suddenly looked every inch the soldier, the officer, I am King Idris Lockmore, he said quietly, and I've condemned you to 6 years of isolation because I was too arrogant and too careless to check what I was signing. I came here tonight to ask your forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Petra stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. The Alpha King, the most powerful shifter in the realm, the man who could turn into a wolf the size of a horse, who'd led the territory wars to victory, who'd united the fractured provinces under one crown. That man was standing in her lighthouse, half naked and dripping on her floor. "Get out," she heard herself say. "Petra, get out!" The words tore from her throat, 6 years of loneliness and anger and bitter isolation exploding out of her like a physical force. "You forgot about me? You forgot? I've been here for 6 years. 6 years without a conversation longer than 90 minutes. 6 years watching the same waves crash on the same rocks. 6 years of talking to myself because there was no one else. And you forgot?" I know, and I'm sorry," Petra laughed, high and wild. "You're sorry? Well, that makes it all better, doesn't it? The king is sorry. Alert the kingdom. Ring the bells." She was advancing on him now, and to his credit, he held his ground. "You sealed the coast. You made it forbidden. You made me forbidden. And for what? Some political maneuver you probably don't even remember? Some decree you signed between courses at a feast?" "It was meant to protect the fishing rights of Port Halland," Idris said quietly. "After the war, there were disputes about territorial waters. The decree was supposed to prevent conflicts until a proper treaty could be negotiated." "And did it?" "Yes. The treaty was signed 4 years ago." 4 years. Petra felt the words like a punch to the gut. 4 years, she repeated. "The treaty was done 4 years ago, and you didn't lift the decree. You didn't send word. You didn't—" Her voice broke. "You just left me here." "I forgot," Idris said again, and there was such anguish in his voice that it cut through even her rage. "I signed hundreds of decrees that year, thousands of orders. I was trying to hold a kingdom together, trying to prevent another war, trying to—" He stopped, shook his head. "I'm not making excuses. There is no excuse. I failed you. I forgot about you. And I'm sorry." Petra turned away, wrapping her arms around herself. The storm outside seemed distant now, a muted roar beyond the thick stone walls. "How did you even find out?" she asked. "About me? How did you know?" "I was reviewing old decrees," Idris said, "trying to clean up loose ends before the next session of Parliament. I saw the Forbidden Coast decree and realized it had never been repealed. So I looked into it, and I found the lighthouse staffing records. Your name, your posting date." He moved closer. She could feel him behind her, close but not touching. "I came here tonight because I couldn't bear to spend another day knowing what I'd done to you," he said. "I came to release you, to lift the decree, to offer you whatever compensation you want, money, land, a position at court, anything, and to apologize, even though I know it's not enough." Petra closed her eyes. Part of her, the angry part, the hurt part, wanted to tell him to leave and never come back, wanted to throw his apology in his face and watch him row back into the storm. But another part, the part that had chosen to drag him from the waves despite the decree, despite everything, that part whispered something different. He came. He rode 40 miles in a storm. He could have sent an envoy, a letter, an order, but he came himself. "I should have let you drown," she said. "Probably. I should throw you back in the ocean right now. You'd be within your rights. Stop agreeing with me." She spun around and found him much closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the water droplets still clinging to his dark hair, close enough to see the flecks of amber in those golden eyes, close enough to catch his scent, salt and storm, and something wild underneath, something that wasn't quite human. "Why are you really here?" she asked. "The truth." Idris looked at her for a long moment. "Because when I saw your name in the records," he said slowly, "when I realized what I'd done, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Guilt, yes, but also curiosity. Who volunteers to live alone on the Forbidden Coast? Who stays for 6 years without complaint? The supply ship captain said you never asked for early rotation, never requested reassignment, never even asked for company." He reached up, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of her wet hair behind her ear. I had to know, he said. I had to meet the woman who was strong enough to choose this isolation, and brave enough to dive into a storm to save a stranger. Petra's breath caught. His hand was still near her face, warm against her cold skin. You're trying to manipulate me, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm trying to be honest with you, perhaps for the first time in my life outside of the battlefield. I don't believe you. I know. He smiled, sad and small. I wouldn't believe me either. Petra stepped back, breaking whatever spell had fallen over them. You need to rest, she said, her voice brisk again. You've been through an ordeal. There's a cot in the supply room. I'll get you some dry clothes. They'll be too small, but they'll do. In the morning, when the storm breaks, you can signal for a ship to pick you up, and then you can lift your decree and forget about me for real this time. Petra, that's Keeper Halford to you. She turned toward the supply room. Now get some sleep. We'll talk in the morning. Or not. I don't particularly care which. She left him standing there, wrapped in blankets, looking lost in a way that had nothing to do with physical location. In the supply room, Petra pulled out her spare clothes with shaking hands. She was not crying. She absolutely was not crying. The water on her face was from the storm, from the ocean, from anything except the tears that were definitely not falling. 6 years. He'd forgotten about her for 6 years. And the worst part, the absolutely worst part, was that she believed him. Believed that he'd genuinely forgotten, that it had been a mistake, that he was sorry. Because the alternative, that he'd known and simply hadn't cared, would have been easier. She could hate that king. But this one, the one who'd rowed 40 miles in a storm to apologize to a lowly lighthouse keeper? She didn't know what to do with that king at all. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the lighthouse, in the warm circle of lamplight, something else was brewing. Something just as dangerous and twice as unpredictable as any weather. Petra gathered the clothes and returned to find Idris exactly where she'd left him. Here, she said, thrusting the bundle at him. They're yours. The cot is through that door. I'll be upstairs. Try not to die in your sleep. It would be inconvenient. Petra. Good night, Your Majesty. She fled up the stairs before he could say anything else, climbing past her own quarters, all the way to the lamp room. The light turned faithfully, sweeping out across the storm-tossed sea, doing its job, keeping ships safe. Petra sank down against the wall, hugging her knees to her chest. Far below, she thought she heard him say something. It might have been her name. It might have been an apology. It might have been nothing at all. She rested her forehead on her knees and finally let the tears come. The Alpha King had come to her lighthouse, and somehow, impossibly, that was worse than if he'd never come at all, because now she knew. She knew he was real, knew he was sorry, knew that he'd risked his life to reach her, and in the morning, he would leave. That was the way of kings. They came, they conquered, and they left. The fact that he'd apologized didn't change the fundamental nature of what he was. The storm would pass, the sea would calm, and Petra would be alone again, just as she'd always been. Dawn came gray and sullen, the storm reduced to a persistent drizzle that misted everything it touched. Petra woke stiff and cold, still curled against the lamp room wall where exhaustion had finally claimed her. The light had burned itself out an hour before sunrise. She could tell by the oil level, but the reflexive panic that should have accompanied that realization never came. What did it matter? The storm had passed. The ships were safe, and the Alpha King was sleeping in her supply room. She descended the stairs quietly, her joints protesting each step. At 32, she was too young to feel this old, but 6 years of climbing lighthouse stairs in all weather had taken their toll. She paused outside the supply room door, listening, steady breathing, still asleep then. Good. Petra moved to the small kitchen area, stoking the fire and putting water on to boil. The familiar routine steadied her. Measure the coffee grounds. Check the bread box. Slice yesterday's loaf, scrape off the mold, toast what remained. This was her life. Simple, solitary, safe. Except nothing felt safe anymore. You're up early. Petra didn't turn around. I'm always up early. The light doesn't tend itself. Idris moved into her peripheral vision, wearing her spare clothes. They were indeed too small, the shirt stretched tight across his shoulders, the pants ending above his ankles. But somehow he still managed to look regal. Some people wore authority like a second skin. "I checked the light," he said. "It went out around 5. "I know." I relit it. Now she did turn, surprise breaking through her carefully maintained indifference. "You know how to operate a lighthouse?" "I was in the Navy before I was king. Spent 2 years on coastal patrol. We had to learn basic lighthouse maintenance in case of emergency." He smiled slightly. "It's been a while, but apparently I remember enough." Petra turned back to the stove, pouring boiling water over the coffee grounds. "There's bread. It's stale." "I don't mind." They ate in silence, sitting at opposite ends of her small table. The food was terrible. The bread was indeed stale, the coffee bitter and weak, but Idris consumed it without complaint. Petra found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, cataloging details. The way he held his cup with both hands, as if savoring the warmth, the scar that ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, the exhaustion that still lingered in the set of his shoulders. "You should signal for pickup," she said finally. "The weather's clear enough now. A fast ship could be here by noon." "I will." He set down his cup. "But first there are things we need to discuss." "No, there aren't. You apologized. I heard you. Now you leave, and we both get on with our lives." "Petra, Keeper Halford." His jaw tightened. "Keeper Halford, do you truly want to stay here? After everything?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected him to push the apology, the compensation, the lifting of the decree. Not this. "It's my post," she said. "That's not what I asked." Petra stood, gathering their dishes with sharp, angry movements. "What I want is irrelevant. This is where I'm assigned. This is what I do." "You volunteered for this assignment. You could unvolunteer." "And go where?" She whirled on him. "Back to Mariner's Rest, where everyone knows I couldn't make it as anything but a lighthouse keeper? Back to Port Severin, where I know no one. I have no family, Your Majesty, no friends waiting for my return. This lighthouse is all I have." The words hung in the air between them, more honest than she'd intended. Idris stood slowly. "Then let me give you something else. I don't want your charity." "It's not charity, it's justice." He moved closer. "The decree will be lifted today. I'll sign the repeal the moment I'm back in Port Severin. But I want to offer you a position. Head of lighthouse operations for the entire coast. You'd oversee all the lights, train new keepers, set standards and protocols. You'd have authority, Petra, respect, a life beyond these walls." She stared at him. "Why?" "Because you're wasted here. Because in 6 years you've never once let that light go out. I checked the logs. Because you dove into a hurricane to save a stranger. Because—" He stopped, something shifting in his expression. "Because I need people like you. People who understand duty, who don't forget." The barb hit home. Petra saw him register it in her face, saw the flash of pain in those gold eyes. "I'll think about it," she said, which was more than she'd meant to give him. "That's all I ask." Before either of them could say more, a horn sounded from the sea. 3 short blasts, repeated twice. Petra's head snapped toward the window. "That's the supply ship," she said. "They're not due for another 2 weeks." They moved to the window together, looking out over the gray waters. Sure enough, the government cutter was anchoring in the shallow bay, and a launch was already being lowered. "They must have spotted the wreckage of your boat," Petra said. "Come to investigate." "Then they're in for a surprise." Idris's voice was grim. The launch reached shore 15 minutes later. Petra and Idris stood outside the lighthouse, watching as 4 figures disembarked. 3 were sailors she vaguely recognized from previous supply runs. The 4th made her blood run cold. Captain Morris. Older now, grayer, but still sporting that same tobacco-stained sneer. "Well, well," Morris said as he approached. "Keeper Halford. Seems you've got yourself a visitor. You know that's a violation of the decree, don't you?" "I'm aware of the decree, Captain," Petra said evenly. "I didn't invite him. He washed up during the storm." Morris's eyes slid to Idris, taking in the ill-fitting clothes, the exhausted posture. "Name?" "That's none of your concern," Idris said quietly. "Everything on the Forbidden Coast is my concern, friend. Now, I asked you a question, and I'm telling you the answer isn't your business. Morris's hand dropped to the cudgel at his belt. The three sailors behind him shifted, hands moving to their own weapons. Petra felt the situation sliding toward violence with the inevitability of a landslide. "Captain Morris," she said quickly, "this man saved my life during the storm. He helped secure the lighthouse when the wind threatened to tear it apart. Whatever the decree says about visitors, surely there's an exception for emergency circumstances." It was a lie, but a plausible one. Morris looked between them, suspicion written across his weathered face. "That's so? Then you won't mind coming back with us for questioning, both of you." "I'm not abandoning my post," Petra said. "Wasn't a request, Halford." Morris gestured to his men. "Take them." The sailors moved forward. Idris stepped in front of Petra, and she felt the change ripple through him. Not a full shift, that would have been catastrophic in such close quarters, but enough. His presence seemed to expand, filling the space with barely contained power. The scent of wild places rolled off him, pine and snow and moonlight. The sailors stopped dead. "I don't think you understand the situation," Idris said, his voice gone low and dangerous. "So let me clarify. I am Idris Lockmore. I am your king, and if you lay one hand on this woman, I will have you in chains before sunset." Morris laughed, actually laughed. "Right, and I'm the Queen of Sheba. Nice try, friend, but..." Idris let the shift take his eyes. They went pure gold, the pupils elongating into vertical slits. When he smiled, his teeth were too sharp, too many. "Want to reconsider that assessment, Captain?" The color drained from Morris's face. Behind him, one of the sailors actually took a step back. Petra had heard stories about the Alpha King's presence, the way he could cow a room full of armed men without speaking a word. Seeing it was something else entirely. "Your Majesty," Morris stammered. We had no idea." Clearly. Idris let his eyes shift back, the predator retreating. "Now, you will return to your ship. You will report that you found me here, alive and well, after my boat capsized in the storm. You will note that Keeper Halford acted with exemplary courage and discretion, and you will await my return to Port Severin, at which point we will discuss your understanding of emergency protocols. Am I clear?" "Crystal, Your Majesty." "Good. Dismissed." Morris and his men practically ran back to their launch. Petra watched them go, her mind reeling. "That," she said quietly, "was incredibly stupid." Idris turned to her. "Excuse me? You just revealed yourself to 4 men who have 0 reason to be loyal to you and every reason to sell this story to the highest bidder. By this time tomorrow, every scandal sheet in the kingdom will have headlines about the Alpha King's secret visit to the Forbidden Coast. I wasn't going to let them arrest you. I've been arrested before. I would have survived," she rounded on him. "But now you've made everything worse. They'll say I seduced you, that I'm your mistress, that this whole isolation story was a cover for some sordid affair." "That's ridiculous. No one would believe, everyone will believe it," the words burst out of her, "because it makes a better story than the truth. The king forgot about a lighthouse keeper. Boring. The king has a secret lover on the Forbidden Coast that sells papers." Idris stared at her, and she saw the moment he realized she was right. His expression shuddered. "I'll issue a statement," he said. "Clarify the situation." "It won't matter. The damage is done." They stood in silence, the weight of the new reality settling over them like ash. The launch had reached the cutter now. Soon it would be underway, carrying Morris and his men and their story back to Port Severin. "I'm sorry," Idris said. "I keep making things worse for you." Petra wanted to argue, but she was too tired. "Just go, please, before you can apologize for anything else." "Petra, go!" He went. She watched from the lighthouse as the cutter's launch returned, as Idris boarded with the stiff formality of a king rather than a shipwreck victim. The cutter weighed anchor, turned, and began its journey back to the capital. Petra climbed to the lamp room. It was full daylight now, no need for the beacon, but she went through the maintenance routine anyway. Polished the lens, cleaned the reflectors, checked the oil reservoir. Normal. Routine. Safe. Except nothing was safe anymore. 3 days later, the storm arrived. Not a weather storm, though she could handle. This was worse. The first boat came at dawn. A small sloop flying the colors of the Port Severin Gazette. A man with a notebook and a woman with a sketch pad rowed ashore, calling questions before they'd even beached their craft. "Keeper Halford, is it true you've been meeting the king here for years?" How long have you been his lover? Did he promise to make you queen? Petra barred the lighthouse door and ignored them. They didn't leave. By noon, 2 more boats had arrived, one from the Daily Chronicle, another from some tabloid rag she'd never heard of. By evening, there were 7 boats anchored in her bay, and the beach was crowded with reporters, artists, and what appeared to be a group of protesters holding signs that read, "Royal Adultery" and "Shame the King." The supply ship came on the 4th day, and Captain Morris himself delivered her provisions with a smirk that made her want to hit him. "Quite the party you've got going, Halford." "I didn't invite any of them." "No? Seems like you invited the most important one." He leaned in close. "How's it feel, being the king's whore?" Petra's fist connected with his jaw before she'd consciously decided to throw the punch. Morris went down hard, blood spraying from his split lip. The sailors behind him started forward, but Petra had already grabbed the cudgel from Morris's belt. "Anyone else want to call me names?" she asked pleasantly. They backed off. Morris pulled himself upright, spitting blood. "That's assault on a royal officer," he snarled. "And what you said was slander. I think we're even." She tossed the cudgel at his feet. "Next time, send someone else with the supplies." She slammed the door before he could respond. That night, someone threw a rock through her window. The note tied around it read, "Home Wrecker." Petra sat on her bed, glass crunching under her boots, and laughed until she cried. The next morning, a different ship arrived, sleeker than the others, flying the royal standard. Petra watched from the lamp room as a figure disembarked, moving with the kind of grace that spoke of weapons training and dangerous competence. A woman, tall and sharp-featured, with hair the color of burnished copper. She dismissed the reporters with a few curt words and a hand gesture that suggested she could make good on any threats she might choose to deliver. They fell back, giving her space. She climbed to the lighthouse alone. Petra met her at the door, the cudgel she'd stolen from Morris in her hand. "I'm not interested in talking to reporters," she said. "Good. I'm not a reporter." The woman's voice was cultured, educated. "I'm Lady Cassandra Thorne, Chief of the King's Guard. May I come in?" Petra hesitated, then stepped aside. Cassandra entered, her sharp eyes cataloging everything. The broken window, hastily covered with oilcloth. The dishes in the sink. The worn furniture and bare walls. "Cozy," she said, not unkindly. "It's functional. What do you want, Lady Thorne?" "To offer you protection. The king is concerned about the situation here." "The king created the situation here." "Agreed." Cassandra moved to the window, looking out at the boats. "The press is having a field day. Half the kingdom thinks you're his secret lover. The other half thinks you're a scheming opportunist who seduced him. Both halves want your head." "Wonderful." The king has issued 3 separate statements clarifying the truth. No one believes him. His advisors are suggesting he denounce you publicly, call you a liar, distance himself from the entire incident. Petra's chest tightened. "And is he going to?" Cassandra turned, her expression unreadable. "He told them, and I quote, 'I'd sooner abdicate than slander a woman who saved my life.'" Then he threw an inkwell at the Duke of Hammersmith. Despite everything, Petra felt something warm unfurl in her chest. He shouldn't have done that. Probably not. Hammersmith's a pompous ass, but he's also the head of the Treasury. Cassandra crossed her arms. "Look, I'll be blunt. This situation is bad. The king's reputation is suffering. Parliament is in an uproar, and you're in actual danger. Those protesters out there, some of them are calling for your arrest, for your execution, in a few cases. So what am I supposed to do? Come back to Port Severin. Accept the king's protection. Let us handle this. And abandon my post? Let them win? Is pride worth your life?" The question hit harder than Petra wanted to admit. She moved to the kitchen, putting water on for tea that neither of them would probably drink. It gave her something to do with her hands. "I spent 6 years alone," she said quietly. 6 years with nothing but my duty and my light. And I never complained, never asked for relief, never even asked for a conversation longer than an hour. I did my job, and I did it well. I know. I read your service record. And now, because I saved a drowning man, I'm vilified. Because your king couldn't keep his mouth shut, I'm called a whore and a homewrecker. Because he rode 40 miles to apologize for something he forgot, My life is destroyed. She turned. So no, Lady Thorne, I'm not going to Port Severin. I'm not going to hide behind the king's protection. I'm going to stay here and tend my light, and the rest of the kingdom can burn for all I care. Cassandra studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, she smiled. The king said you were stubborn. The king doesn't know me. He's trying to change that. Cassandra pulled an envelope from her jacket. He asked me to deliver this, and to tell you that if you won't come to the capital, he's coming back here. Petra took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in a strong, slanted hand. Tell him not to, she said. Tell him he's done enough. I'll tell him. He won't listen. Cassandra moved to the door. One more thing. The decree was repealed yesterday. This coast is no longer forbidden, which means those reporters have every legal right to be here, and so do the protesters. She left before Petra could respond. Alone again, Petra opened the envelope. The letter inside was brief. Keeper Halford, I'm told I've made things worse. This seems to be my particular talent where you're concerned. Lady Thorne will have offered you protection. I hope you'll accept it. If not, know this. I will not denounce you. I will not distance myself from the truth. And I will not allow anyone to harm you. You saved my life. The least I can do is return the favor. Idris. At the bottom, he'd added a postscript. P.S. The position I offered still stands. Please consider it. Petra read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Outside, the crowd was growing. She counted 15 boats now, and more appeared to be on the way. The beach was packed with people, some merely curious, others actively hostile. Someone had erected a gallows in effigy, a crude doll labeled the Lighthouse Whore, swinging from a makeshift noose. Petra felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. She climbed to the lamp room and began preparing the light for evening, even though the sun wouldn't set for hours. The routine steadied her. Oil reservoir, check. Wick trimmed. Lens polished. They can't drive me out, she said to the empty room. This is my post. My light. Mine. But even as she said it, she knew it was a losing battle. The decree was lifted. The coast was open. And the mob below would only grow. By nightfall, there were 23 boats in her bay. Petra lit the beacon and watched its light sweep across a sea of hostile faces. Somewhere in Port Severin, a king was preparing to defend her. And here, alone in her lighthouse, Petra was preparing for war. The siege began in earnest on the 7th day. Petra woke to the sound of hammering. She stumbled to the window, still half asleep, and froze. Overnight, someone had constructed a wooden platform on the beach directly in front of the lighthouse. A makeshift stage, complete with a podium, and what looked like theater lights powered by a generator. She could hear chugging in the distance. A banner stretched across the front. Town hall meeting. Justice for the kingdom. You've got to be kidding me, Petra muttered. By mid-morning, the crowd had swelled to at least 300. They came in boats, on rafts, some even swimming the last 100 yards. The beach couldn't hold them all, so they spilled onto the rocks, up the path, forming a human barrier between Petra and the rest of the world. A man climbed onto the stage, heavy-set, with the ruddy face of someone who spent their days in taverns rather than courtrooms. He wore a sash that proclaimed him citizen advocate in gilt letters. People of the realm, his voice carried across the water, amplified by some kind of speaking cone. We gather here today to address a grave injustice. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Petra watched from the lamp room, her hands clenched on the railing. For 6 years we were told this coast was forbidden. For 6 years, honest fishermen lost their livelihood, merchants lost their roots, families were separated from their ancestral shores. And why? We were told it was for our protection, for the good of the kingdom. More cheers. Someone threw a bottle that shattered on the rocks. But now we know the truth. The forbidden coast wasn't closed for protection. It was closed so the king could conduct his illicit affairs in private, so he could rendezvous with his mistress without the eyes of the kingdom upon him. That's a lie, Petra shouted, knowing no one could hear her. Keeper Halford, the advocate pointed directly at the lighthouse. We know you're in there. Come down and face the people you've wronged. The crowd took up the chant. Come down, come down, come down. Petra backed away from the window, her heart hammering. This wasn't just reporters anymore. This was organized, coordinated. Someone with resources and influence was orchestrating this. She descended to the main floor, barring the door and checking the windows. The broken one she'd already reinforced with boards. The others were small, set high in the thick stone walls. Defensible, at least for now. The pounding on the door started an hour later. "Keeper Halford, open up! We just want to talk! You can't hide forever!" Petra ignored them, climbing to the lamp room to check the light. The sun was still high, but she'd learned long ago that preparation was everything. She ran through her emergency protocols. Water. She had the cistern, fed by rain, and a small spring. Should last weeks if she was careful. Food, dried goods, canned fish, hardtack. Less than she'd like, but enough. Fuel for the lamp, plenty. The government might have forgotten about her, but they'd never shorted her on lamp oil. She could wait them out. The first rock hit the lighthouse around sunset. Then another, and another. Soon it was a hail of stones against the ancient walls, a percussion that made the whole structure ring like a bell. Petra lit the beacon early, sending its light sweeping across the hostile crowd below. Some of them jeered, others covered their eyes, but none of them left. The second boat arrived at midnight. Petra saw it from the lamp room, a royal cutter, flying the king's colors, cutting through the dark water with grim purpose. The crowd saw it too. The jeering intensified. "The king comes to his horror, protecting his property." The cutter anchored and a launch was lowered. 6 figures, all armed. Petra recognized Lady Cassandra's copper hair even in the dark. They made it halfway to shore before the crowd attacked. It wasn't organized, just mob fury given form. People wading into the water, grabbing at the launch, trying to capsize it. Cassandra and her guards drew weapons, swords, not guns, Petra noted with sick relief, and held the crowd back without killing anyone. But it was close. Very close. The launch reached shore, and Cassandra's guards formed a perimeter while she sprinted up the path to the lighthouse. Rocks flew. Someone threw a lit torch that tumbled end over end before splashing into the surf. Petra met her at the door, yanking her inside and slamming it shut behind her. "Are you insane?" Petra demanded. "You could have been killed." Cassandra was breathing hard, her sword still drawn. "The king sent me. He's declared this lighthouse a royal sanctuary. Anyone who attacks it is committing treason." "That's just going to make them angrier." "Probably," Cassandra sheathed her blade. "But it gives me legal authority to defend you with lethal force if necessary. Which, given the mood out there, might be very necessary indeed." A crash from upstairs made them both look up. "Please tell me that wasn't—" Petra started. Another crash, the sound of breaking glass. They ran. The lamp room was chaos. Someone had climbed the outside of the lighthouse, scaled the damn wall like it was a ladder, and smashed through the small ventilation window. They'd made it inside before falling, or jumping, or being pulled back out. But in their rampage, they'd knocked over 2 of the oil reservoirs. Lamp fuel spread across the floor, its sharp scent filling the air. The beacon still turned, still sent its light across the sea, but the puddle of oil was inches from the open flame of the central lamp. "Get out," Petra said quietly. "What?" "Get out. If this ignites, the whole room goes up. The whole lighthouse, probably. Get out." Cassandra grabbed her arm. "Not without you." "I need to secure the lamp. Go!" For a moment she thought Cassandra would refuse. Then the warrior woman nodded once and fled down the stairs. Petra moved fast, rags from the supply bin, soaking up as much oil as she could, sand from the fire bucket, spreading it over the rest. Her hands shook, and the fumes made her head swim, but she kept working. The lamp continued its rotation, oblivious to the danger, just doing its job. Like her. She'd almost gotten it contained when she heard the screaming, not from the lamp room, from below. Multiple voices, high with panic. Petra abandoned the cleanup and took the stairs 3 at a time. She burst onto the main floor to find Cassandra at the door, her sword drawn, holding back children. 4 of them, none older than 12, pressed against the door from the outside. Their faces were terrified in the lighthouse beam's sweep. Behind them, the crowd surged, pressing them forward, crushing them against the unyielding wood. "They're using them as shields," Cassandra said, her voice shaking with fury. "The bastards are using children." "Open the door," Petra said. "If I open it, the mob comes through." "I said Open the door! Cassandra hesitated for half a heartbeat, then threw the bolt. The door slammed inward, and the children tumbled through. Petra caught two, Cassandra grabbed the other two, and together they pulled them clear as the crowd surged forward. Cassandra met the first wave with her shoulder, not her blade, shoving them back. "Stand down! By order of the king! Stand down!" They didn't stand down. More poured through the door. Petra shoved the children behind her, grabbing the cudgel she'd taken from Captain Morris. The first person to reach her was a woman, wild-eyed and screaming about home wreckers. Petra used the cudgel defensively, blocking, pushing back, trying not to hurt anyone. It was chaos. 15 people, 20, all crammed into the lighthouse's ground floor. Cassandra fought like a demon, her sword's flat side cracking against skulls and shoulders. She wasn't killing, but she wasn't being gentle either. Petra caught a glimpse of one of the children, a girl, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and terrified eyes, cowering against the wall. Something in Petra snapped. "Enough!" The word came out with a force she didn't know she possessed. It echoed off the stone walls, seemed to vibrate in the air itself. Everyone froze. Into the shocked silence, Petra spoke. "Get out of my lighthouse." Her voice was quiet now, but somehow it carried. "You want to call me names? Fine. You want to protest? That's your right. But this?" She gestured at the children. "Using kids as weapons, destroying property, assaulting royal guards. That's where I draw the line." "You seduced our king," someone shouted from the back. "I saved your king." The words erupted from her. "He was drowning. He would have died if I hadn't pulled him from the water. And yes, he came here to apologize for abandoning me, for forgetting me, for leaving me to rot in isolation for 6 years while you all went about your lives. But I didn't seduce him. I didn't scheme. I didn't plan any of this. I just did my job. The same job I've done for 6 years without complaint, without recognition, without so much as a thank you from any of you." Silence. "So here's what's going to happen," Petra continued. "You're going to leave, all of you. You're going to take your children and your protests and your righteous anger, and you're going to get off this beach, because I have a light to tend and ships to protect, and I'm done with this circus." "We have a right to be here," the citizen advocate shouted from somewhere in the crowd. "The decree is lifted." "You have a right to be on the beach. You don't have a right to be in my lighthouse. That's government property, and I'm ordering you out." "You can't order us to do anything. You're just a keeper." Petra smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "You're right. I can't." But she can. She gestured to Cassandra, who raised her sword. The blade caught the light, and every eye in the room went to it. "Chief of the King's Guard," Cassandra said pleasantly, "empowered by royal decree to defend this lighthouse and its keeper with any force necessary. Anyone still inside this building in 60 seconds will be arrested for treason. Anyone who resists arrest will be treated as an enemy combatant. Your choice." They left. Not quickly, not quietly, but they left. Petra and Cassandra stood in the doorway, watching the crowd retreat down the path to the beach. "That was well done," Cassandra said. "That was terrifying." Petra's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "The children are fine. Shaken, but fine." Cassandra sheathed her sword. "Though we have a problem." "Just one?" "The crowd's not leaving. They're regrouping on the beach. And I think, yes, they're building bonfires, planning to wait us out." Petra looked past her to where the children still huddled against the wall. The dark-haired girl was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," Petra said softly, kneeling beside her. "You're safe now. What's your name?" Marie," the girl hiccuped. "My ma said we had to come, said it was our duty, but I didn't want to. I didn't want to hurt anyone." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Petra looked at the other children. "Where are your parents?" "Down there." A boy, maybe 12, pointed to the beach. "They said if we didn't help push through the door, we were traitors too." Petra felt something cold settle in her chest. "Cassandra, we need to get these kids out of here." "Agreed, but how? The crowd will just grab them again." Before Petra could answer, a new sound cut through the night. A horn, deep and resonant, coming from the sea. Everyone turned. A ship was cutting through the dark water. Not a cutter this time. Something bigger. A royal frigate, its deck lined with soldiers, its cannons visible even in the darkness. And standing at the prow, illuminated by lantern light, was a figure that made Petra's heart stutter. Idris. The king had come. The crowd saw him too. The jeering started up again, but there was uncertainty in it now. A frigate carried enough firepower to level the beach, enough soldiers to arrest everyone present. The ship anchored, and 3 launches were lowered. Idris was in the first, flanked by more guards. He stood in the bow like a figurehead, his face set in an expression Petra couldn't read from this distance. The launches hit the beach, and the king stepped ashore. The crowd surged forward, and for a moment Petra thought there would be violence. But Idris raised one hand, and the sheer force of his presence stopped them cold. "I am Idris Lockmore," he said, his voice carrying across the water. "Your king. And I have something to say." The beach went silent. "You're angry. I understand that. The Forbidden Coast Decree cost you jobs, homes, livelihoods. It was meant to prevent war, but it caused suffering instead. That's on me. I signed it. I enforced it. And yes, I forgot about the woman who was stationed here to maintain the lighthouse." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "But Keeper Halford is not my mistress. She's not my lover. She's a civil servant who did her job faithfully for 6 years while the rest of us forgot she existed. When my boat capsized, she saved my life at great personal risk. When I revealed myself, trying to protect her from arrest, I inadvertently destroyed her reputation. That's also on me." He stepped forward, and the crowd parted before him like water. "You want someone to blame for the decree? Blame me. You want someone to punish for the suffering it caused? Punish me. But leave Keeper Halford alone. She's done nothing wrong except survive in a situation I created." "Why should we believe you?" someone shouted. "Kings lie." "Yes," Idris said simply. "We do. We lie to protect the kingdom, to prevent panic, to maintain order. But I'm not lying now, and if you don't believe me, then watch." He turned to face the lighthouse, and his voice rose. "Keeper Petra Halford, by my authority as king, I hereby relieve you of your duties on the Forbidden Coast. Your service is ended. You are free to go." Petra's breath caught. From inside the lighthouse, she couldn't respond, but she felt the words like a physical blow. "Furthermore," Idris continued, "I hereby offer you the position of Royal Lighthouse Coordinator, overseeing all coastal lights in the kingdom, reporting directly to the crown. The position comes with a residence in Port Severin, a salary of 5,000 crowns annually, and full authority over lighthouse operations. Do you accept?" The crowd was silent now, watching, waiting. Petra looked at Cassandra, who shrugged. "Your call." She thought about 6 years of isolation, 6 years of watching the same waves crash on the same rocks, 6 years of duty without recognition, service without thanks. And she thought about the king who'd rowed 40 miles in a storm to apologize, who'd defended her when his advisors told him to denounce her, who was standing on a beach in front of hundreds of hostile people, offering her a way out. Petra walked to the door and stepped outside. The crowd's attention snapped to her. She heard gasps, curses, at least one person spitting. She ignored them all, walking down the path with her head high. She stopped 10 feet from Idris, close enough to see his face clearly in the lantern light. Those gold eyes were steady on hers, and she saw no deception in them. Just exhaustion, determination, and something else. Something that made her chest tight. "You're firing me," she said. "I'm setting you free. And if I don't want to be free? If I want to stay?" Something flickered across his face. "Then I'll withdraw the offer and leave you in peace. But Petra," his voice dropped, meant for her ears only, "you deserve better than this. Better than isolation and mobs and broken windows. Please, let me give you that." She studied him for a long moment. Then she turned to face the crowd. "I accept," she said clearly. "I accept the position of Royal Lighthouse Coordinator." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some booed, most just talked among themselves, processing this new development. "However," Petra continued, raising her voice, "I have conditions." Idris blinked. "Conditions?" "These 4 children," she gestured to where Cassandra was leading them out of the lighthouse. "They were used as weapons tonight, forced by their parents to assault a government building. I want them removed from those parents' custody and placed in homes where they'll be safe." Done, Idris said immediately. The citizen advocate who organized this circus. I want him investigated. This wasn't spontaneous. Someone paid for that stage, those generators, the coordination. Already being done. And I want Captain Morris court-martialed for dereliction of duty, assault on a civilian, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Idris's eyebrows rose. What did Morris do? Called me a whore. And let's be honest, he's been a terrible captain for years. Also done. Idris smiled slightly. Any other conditions? Petra took a breath. One more. The lighthouse stays operational. Whoever you assign here gets full support. Regular rotations, proper supplies, and for the love of everything, regular human contact. No one should have to live the way I did. Agreed. I'll draft the protocols myself. They stood facing each other, king and keeper, while the crowd watched and whispered. So, Idris said quietly. Do we have a deal? Petra extended her hand. We have a deal. He took it, his grip warm and strong. And in that moment, shaking hands on a beach surrounded by hundreds of witnesses, something shifted between them. Some invisible barrier cracked and fell away. I need to secure the lighthouse, Petra said. Transfer the keys, file the paperwork, make sure the light stays lit. Of course, take whatever time you need. She turned to go, then stopped. Idris? It was the first time she'd used his name. She saw him register it, saw something brighten in those gold eyes. Yes? Thank you for coming, for all of this. Thank you for saving my life. Both times. Petra climbed back up the path, Cassandra falling into step beside her. That was quite the dramatic exit you're staging, Cassandra said. I learned from the best. Your king has a flair for the theatrical. He's your king too now. Technically, your direct supervisor, Petra groaned. I didn't think about that. They reached the lighthouse, and Petra took one last look at the lamp room, the stairs, the small kitchen where she'd eaten so many silent meals. 6 years of her life contained in these walls. Any regrets? Cassandra asked. Ask me tomorrow. Below, she could hear Idris addressing the crowd again, his voice firm as he ordered them to disperse, threatening arrests for anyone who remained past sunrise. Some were already leaving, their boats pulling away from the shore. The circus was ending. Petra spent the next hour preparing the lighthouse for her successor. She wrote detailed notes about the lamp's quirks, the tricky step third from the top, the way the wind sometimes came in from the northeast and made the whole structure sing. She packed her few belongings, clothes, books, the letter Idris had sent, folded and refolded until the creases were permanent. When she emerged, the beach was nearly empty. A few stragglers remained, but the mob was gone. The bonfires still burned, but they looked sad now, inadequate against the vast dark of the sea. Idris waited at the bottom of the path, his guards at a respectful distance. Ready? He asked. No, but I'm coming anyway. He smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, less burdened. The ship's waiting. Fair warning, the voyage to Port Severin takes about 4 hours. And I snore. You're not sleeping in my cabin. Obviously not, but the walls are thin. Despite everything, Petra laughed. The sound surprised her, rusty from disuse. They walked to the launch together, and Petra didn't look back at the lighthouse. If she looked back, she might change her mind. Might run back up those stairs and bar the door and pretend this night had never happened. The launch pushed off, cutting through the dark water toward the frigate. Petra sat in the bow, the salt spray cool on her face, and for the first time in 6 years she was leaving the forbidden coast. Behind her, the lighthouse beacon continued its eternal rotation, sweeping its light across the empty sea, doing its job, just like she'd taught it. Ahead, the frigate loomed larger, its deck crowded with soldiers who watched her approach with curiosity and, in some cases, hostility. Petra lifted her chin. Let them stare. She'd survived 6 years alone. She could survive their judgment. The launch reached the ship, and a rope ladder was lowered. Idris climbed first, then turned to offer her a hand. Petra ignored it, climbing on her own. When she reached the deck, she found herself surrounded by armed men and women, all wearing the king's colors. Captain, Idris said to a grizzled man with 3 scars across his face. This is Petra Halford, the new Royal Lighthouse Coordinator. She's to be afforded every courtesy. Anyone who disrespects her answers to me personally. The captain's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. Understood, Your Majesty. We've prepared the guest cabin for her. Thank you, Captain Reeves. Idris turned to Petra. Would you like to rest, or would you prefer to see the ship? I'd like to watch us sail away. Something in her voice must have told him not to argue. He simply nodded and led her to the stern rail, where they stood side by side as the anchor was weighed and the frigate began to move. The lighthouse grew smaller, its light still visible long after the building itself had faded into darkness. Petra watched until even the light was gone, swallowed by distance and the curve of the earth. It's strange, she said quietly. I hated that place, but now that I'm leaving, I feel like you're losing a part of yourself, Idris finished. She glanced at him. Yes, exactly that. I felt the same way when I left the Navy to become king. The ship I'd served on felt more like home than the palace ever did. Do you regret it, becoming king? He was quiet for a long moment. Ask me tomorrow. Petra smiled despite herself. That seems to be the answer to everything tonight. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the dark water flow past. Around them, the ship's crew worked with practiced efficiency, their movements coordinated by years of training. The sails filled with wind and the frigate picked up speed. Somewhere below deck, a bell rang. Change of watch. I should let you rest, Idris said. It's been a long night. The longest, Petra agreed. But she didn't move. Neither did he. Petra, he said finally, I meant what I said on the beach. You deserve better than what happened to you, and I'm going to make sure you get it. Why? The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. Why do you care so much? He turned to face her fully, and in the lantern light, his expression was entirely open. Because when I was drowning, he said softly, when the waves were pulling me under and I'd accepted that I was going to die, I saw you, running into the storm without hesitation, risking your life for someone you didn't even know. And I thought if there are still people like that in the world, then maybe we're not as lost as I feared. Petra's breath caught. And then I found out what I'd done to you, he continued, how I'd abandoned you. And I realized that the person who saved me was the same person I'd condemned to 6 years of isolation. It felt like cosmic punishment, like the universe saying, look what your carelessness cost. Look at the good you nearly destroyed. I'm not that good, Petra said. I hit Captain Morris. He called you a whore. I'd have done worse. I yelled at you. I deserved it. I made you sleep in a supply closet. It was very comfortable, actually. Despite everything, Petra laughed. And then, because the night had been long and strange and full of impossible things, she found herself crying. Not sad tears exactly, more like release. 6 years of isolation, of holding herself together, of never allowing herself to break because there was no one to help her put the pieces back together. Now there was someone. Idris didn't try to touch her, didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply stood there, a solid presence in the dark, and waited. When the tears finally stopped, Petra wiped her face with the back of her hand. Sorry, she said. Don't be. You're entitled to a few tears, maybe even a few dozen. She smiled, watery but genuine. I'm going to be terrible at this new job, you know. I have no experience with management or politics or any of it. You managed to survive 6 years alone while maintaining a perfect operational record. I think you'll do fine. Perfect record except for the mob that tried to kill me. That wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? She turned to him. You came to apologize and I let you in. I could have sent you away, could have followed protocol and reported you immediately. But I didn't. I made a choice, and it had consequences. Petra! A shout from the crow's nest cut him off. Ship approaching! Southeast! Every head on deck turned. Petra followed their gaze and saw lights cutting through the darkness. Multiple lights. Multiple ships. Captain! Idris barked. Report! Captain Reeves had a spyglass to his eye. 7 vessels, Your Majesty. Flying no colors, closing fast. Pirates? Cassandra asked, appearing at Idris's shoulder. Or worse. Reeves lowered the glass. They're between us and Port Severin. Deliberate positioning. Idris's expression hardened. Battle stations. All hands. Prepare for engagement. The deck exploded into controlled chaos. Sailors running to their positions, gun crews loading cannons, Marines forming up with rifles. Petra felt her heart hammering. "What's happening?" "Someone doesn't want you to reach Port Severin," Cassandra said grimly. "Someone with enough resources to hire 7 ships." "But why? I'm just a lighthouse keeper." "We're a lighthouse keeper." Idris's eyes had gone gold, the wolf rising. "Now you're the king's new coordinator, a symbol of royal authority, and someone wants to make sure that symbol never reaches the capital." The approaching ships were close enough now that Petra could make out their silhouettes. Sleek, fast, armed. These weren't merchant vessels or fishing boats. These were warships. And they were coming straight for the frigate, their cannons already run out, ready to fire. The first cannon shot screamed overhead, close enough that Petra felt the air displacement like a slap. It plunged into the water 50 yards off the port bow, sending up a geyser that drenched the forward deck. "Return fire!" Captain Reeves roared. The frigate's cannons erupted in a thunderous broadside that made Petra's teeth rattle. She stumbled, caught herself on the rail, and watched the iron shot arc through the darkness toward the approaching ships. Most missed. One struck home, punching through the lead vessel's hull with a crack like breaking bones. The ship listed, but kept coming. "They're not trying to sink us," Cassandra observed, her hand on her sword hilt. "They're hurting us." She was right. The 7 ships had formed a loose semicircle, their cannons firing in controlled bursts that forced the frigate to turn, to veer, to move away from the route to Port Severin, toward open water, toward isolation. "They want to separate us from reinforcements," Idris said. His voice had changed, gone deeper, rougher. The shift was starting. "Reeves, hard to starboard, ram through their line. Your Majesty, we'll take heavy damage." "Do it!" The captain snapped orders, and the frigate's wheel spun. The ship turned, its sails filling as it picked up speed, aiming directly at the gap between 2 of the enemy vessels. Petra grabbed the rail as the deck tilted. Around her, sailors worked with grim efficiency, reloading cannons, preparing for impact. The Marines had taken positions along the gunwales, rifles ready. They were going to die. The certainty settled over Petra like a shroud. 7 ships against 1, in the middle of the night, miles from any help. They were going to die, and it was her fault. "No." The word came out quiet but firm. Idris turned to her. "What?" "No." Louder now. "This is wrong. They're not trying to kill us. They're trying to capture us. Specifically, they're trying to capture me." "What makes you think that?" "Because if they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. 7 ships with cannons against 1? They could obliterate us. But they're not. They're being careful." She pointed to the enemy formation. "Look at their positions. They're set up for boarding, not sinking." Cassandra studied the approaching vessels through a spyglass. "She's right. Those are grappling hooks, not chain shot. They want prisoners." "Why would anyone want to capture a lighthouse keeper?" Reeves demanded. "Because I'm not just a lighthouse keeper anymore." Petra turned to Idris. "I'm a symbol. You said it yourself. The king's new coordinator, the woman who survived 6 years alone, the one you publicly defended. Whoever's behind this wants to use me against you." Another cannon shot, closer this time. The enemy ships were tightening their noose. Idris's eyes were fully gold now, his pupils vertical slits. "Then we fight. We break through their line and they follow us all the way to Port Severin, attacking civilian ships along the way?" Petra shook her head. "Or we lead them on a chase that ends with us trapped against the coast?" "No. We need a different approach." "I'm open to suggestions." Petra looked at the dark water, the enemy ships, the frigate's crew preparing for a battle they couldn't win. And then, impossibly, she smiled. "How good are you at swimming?" 10 minutes later, Petra stood on the deck and borrowed sailor's clothes, a waterproof pack strapped to her back. Around her, Idris, Cassandra, and 6 of the frigate's best swimmers made similar preparations. Captain Reeves looked like he wanted to mutiny. "Your Majesty, this is insane. You're the king. You can't just abandon ship and—" "I'm not abandoning ship. I'm executing a tactical withdrawal." Idris checked his own pack, making sure the contents were secure. "You'll continue on course, making as much noise as possible. Fire every cannon you have. Make them think we're making a run for it." While you swim to where exactly? Petra pointed northeast, where a dark smudge on the horizon marked a cluster of rocky islands. The Widow's Teeth, about 2 miles. We can make it if we're fast. Those islands are uninhabited, just rocks and seabirds. Exactly. The last place they'd look for a king and his new coordinator. She turned to Idris. Once we're clear, your ship can signal for reinforcements from Port Severin. The Navy can deal with these mercenaries while we wait it out on the islands. And if they spot us in the water? Cassandra asked. Then we pray you're all as good at swimming as you claim. Another broadside from the enemy ships. Closer now. They were nearly in boarding range. Time to go, Idris said. Captain, you have your orders. Keep them busy. And Reeves? Don't get yourself killed. That's an order. Wouldn't dream of it, Your Majesty. They climbed over the rail, 8 figures in dark clothing, barely visible against the night sea. The water was cold, shockingly cold after the warmth of the deck, but Petra had been cold before. She struck out for the distant islands, her strokes strong and steady. Behind them, the frigate erupted in a full broadside, all cannons firing at once. The noise was tremendous, covering the small splashes of their entry. Petra swam hard, putting distance between herself and the ship, trusting the others to keep pace. The enemy vessels took the bait. She heard their cannons answer, heard the creak of timber as they moved to engage the frigate. None turned toward the swimmers. 2 miles. Petra had swum farther in her youth, racing her friends along the coast of Mariner's Rest. But that had been in daylight, in calm water, without a pack on her back and the weight of a kingdom's fate on her shoulders. She swam. The cold seeped into her bones, making her muscles ache. Salt water stung her eyes, filled her mouth when she mistimed a breath. Behind her she could hear the others, the splash of limbs, the occasional curse when someone swallowed water. Ahead, the Widow's Teeth grew larger. Not welcoming, exactly, just less hostile than the alternative. They were halfway there when she heard it. A shout from one of the enemy ships. Then another. "They've spotted us!" Cassandra gasped, pulling up beside her. "Swim faster!" But there was no faster. They were already at their limit, already burning through reserves they didn't have. Petra looked back and saw one of the enemy vessels turning, breaking off from the frigate engagement, coming for them. "Dive!" Idris's voice rough with the shift. "When I say go, dive deep and scatter. They can't shoot what they can't see." "For how long?" one of the sailors asked. "Long as you can hold your breath. Go!" Petra sucked in air and dove. The water closed over her head, dark and silent. She kicked down, down, feeling the pressure build in her ears. Around her, she sensed more than saw the others doing the same, spreading out, becoming harder to target. Above, muffled by the water, she heard splashes. Bullets, she realized. They were shooting into the water, trying to hit swimmers they could barely see. Her lungs started to burn. She swam lateral, trying to put distance between herself and where she'd dived. The pack on her back dragged at her, trying to pull her up. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. Not yet. Not yet. Her lungs were screaming now. Every instinct demanded she surface, breathe, live, just a little longer. The black spots multiplied. Her vision tunneled. She was going to pass out, going to drown in the dark water just like Idris almost had. Strong hands grabbed her, yanking her upward. She broke the surface, gasping, coughing, barely able to keep her head above water. "Breathe," Idris's voice in her ear. "Petra, breathe." She managed to suck in air, her vision clearing enough to see they'd surfaced in the shadow of one of the Widow's Teeth, a massive rock formation that blocked them from the enemy ship's view. "Everyone?" Cassandra's voice also gasping. "Here," came 6 responses, scattered but close. "They're still coming," one of the sailors said. "We need to move." They swam again, using the rocks as cover, moving from shadow to shadow. The enemy ship prowled nearby, lanterns sweeping across the water. But the Widow's Teeth were a maze of stone and current, and the swimmers knew how to use it. By the time they dragged themselves onto a rocky beach on the largest island, the enemy ship had moved on, searching farther out to sea. Petra collapsed on the rocks, her entire body shaking with cold and exhaustion. Around her, the others were in similar states. Even Idris, who'd partially shifted during the swim, his features caught between human and wolf. "Everyone alive?" Cassandra asked. 7 affirmatives, weak but present. "Then we wait for dawn, and we pray Reeves can hold out long enough to signal for help. Petra closed her eyes, listening to the sound of waves against stone. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd actually made it. She must have passed out, because when she opened her eyes again, gray dawn light was filtering through the rocks. Someone had covered her with a blanket. Where they'd gotten it, she had no idea, and a small fire crackled nearby, sheltered from view by a natural stone windbreak. Idris sat by the fire, fully human again, his clothes dried in stiff, salt-stained wrinkles. He looked exhausted but alert, his gold eyes scanning the horizon. "Anything?" Petra croaked. He turned, and something in his expression softened. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I swam 2 miles in the dark while being shot at." "Accurate." He offered her a canteen. Water, fresh, from a spring Cassandra found. The islands aren't completely barren. Petra drank gratefully. The water was cold and tasted faintly of minerals, but it was the best thing she'd ever consumed. "The others?" "Sleeping. Cassandra's on watch on the high rocks. We've seen 3 enemy ships patrolling, but they haven't found us yet." "And the frigate?" Idris's jaw tightened. "We saw it at first light, still afloat but damaged. It made it about 5 miles south before having to drop anchor for repairs. The enemy ships are keeping their distance now. I think they're waiting for reinforcements." "So we're trapped." "For now." He poked at the fire with a stick, but Reeves would have sent up signal flares as soon as he was clear of immediate danger. The Navy should respond within 12 hours. If they believe him, if they send enough ships, if the enemy doesn't intercept them. "You're very pessimistic for someone who just executed a brilliant tactical withdrawal." Despite everything, Petra smiled. "It was a terrible plan. We could have drowned." "But we didn't." He looked at her fully now. "You saw what no one else did. That they wanted you alive. Most commanders would have fought. You chose to flee, and it saved all our lives. I spent 6 years watching ships navigate dangerous waters. You learn to read intent, to see what people are really after." "Teach me." The request surprised her. "What?" "Teach me to see the way you do, to read situations that clearly." He shifted to sit beside her. "I'm good at tactics, at war, but subtlety, understanding what people really want versus what they say they want. I'm terrible at it. That's why I signed a decree without reading it, why I forgot about you. I see the immediate threat and miss everything else." Petra studied him. The king of the realm, the Alpha, the most powerful shifter alive, was asking a former lighthouse keeper for lessons in observation. "All right," she said, "let's start with our current situation. What do you see?" 7 ships, well-armed, coordinated attack. Someone with significant resources. "Look deeper. Why 7 ships? Why not 10 or 20? He frowned. 7 is enough to overpower a single frigate without being so many that they draw attention? Exactly. So we're not dealing with a nation-state. They can't muster large fleets openly. This is private, mercenaries, pirates, or a noble with a secret navy. "The Duke of Hammersmith," Idris said slowly. "The one I threw the inkwell at. He's head of the treasury. He'd have access to funds without oversight." "And what would he gain from capturing me?" "Leverage against me. Proof that I'm unstable, choosing a commoner for a high position. Ammunition for his faction in Parliament." Idris's eyes went hard. "That son of a bitch! I'm going to have him arrested the moment we get back." "You can't. Not without proof. I'm the king. I don't need proof." "Yes, you do." Petra touched his arm. "That's the difference between a tyrant and a ruler. You need evidence. You need process. Otherwise, you're just proving Hammersmith's point, that you're impulsive and dangerous." Idris looked at where her hand rested on his arm. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. "You'd make a terrible subject, too willing to argue with authority. I spent 6 years with no authority but my own. Hard to unlearn that. Don't." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Don't unlearn it. I need people who'll argue with me, who'll tell me when I'm being an idiot." "You're being an idiot now." "How?" "You're sitting next to a woman who's been vilified by half the kingdom, who nearly got you killed last night, who's going to be a political liability for the rest of your reign, and you're looking at her like—" She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. "Like what?" His voice had gone soft. "Like I matter." You do matter. I'm a lighthouse keeper. You were a lighthouse keeper. Now you're the woman who saved my life. Twice. Who faced down a mob without flinching. Who executed a tactical withdrawal that 3 of my generals would never have thought of. He reached up, tucking a strand of her salt-dried hair behind her ear. You matter, Petra, whether you believe it or not. She should move away, should remember propriety and position and all the reasons why a king and a commoner shouldn't. His lips were warm despite the cold, gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. It was a question more than a statement, an offer more than a demand. Petra answered by kissing him back. It lasted only a moment. Then Cassandra's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Ships! 8 of them! Northeast! They broke apart, both on their feet instantly. Petra grabbed the spyglass Idris handed her and trained it on the horizon. 8 ships, flying royal colors, the Navy, responding to Reeves's signal. Finally, Idris breathed. But Petra was still looking through the glass. Something was wrong. The ships were coming fast, but their formation was off. Too aggressive. Too... Oh no, she whispered. What? They're not responding to Reeves. Look at their heading. They're going straight for the enemy vessels. That's good, isn't it? Not if the enemy convinces them we're the real threat. She lowered the glass. Think about it. 7 merchant vessels peacefully patrolling their contracted waters, versus 1 damaged royal frigate and a king who supposedly abandoned ship. Who do you think they'll believe? Idris's face went pale. Hammersmith. He could have sent orders, told them I'd been compromised, that I needed to be rescued from hostile elements. Can you signal them? Prove who you are? Not from here. We'd need to get to those rocks. He pointed to a high outcropping. But we'd be visible to the enemy ships too. The Navy vessels were closing fast, and the 7 enemy ships had turned to meet them, not fleeing but forming a defensive line, making it look like they were the ones under attack. We need to reach that outcropping, Petra said. We need to signal both fleets, make them see the truth. It's a half-mile across open ground. We'll be spotted. Then we run fast. She was already moving, scrambling over the rocks. Behind her, she heard Idris shouting for the others, heard the sound of boots on stone as they followed. The climb was brutal. The rocks were slick with spray, and there was no clear path. Petra's hands bled from gripping sharp stone. Her lungs burned from the exertion, but she kept climbing. They were 3/4 of the way up when the shout came from below. There, on the rocks! One of the enemy ships had spotted them. Cannons turned, adjusting aim. Climb! Cassandra roared. Petra climbed. Her foot slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment she hung by her hands over a 50-foot drop. Then someone grabbed her collar, Idris, leaning down from above, and hauled her up. They crested the outcropping just as the first cannon shot struck the rocks below. Stone shards flew, peppering them with debris. But they were at the top, and from here both fleets were visible. The signal kit, Petra gasped. In my pack! One of the sailors, a young woman named Kira, was already pulling out the waterproof bag. Signal flags, a mirror, and flares. Standard lighthouse equipment. Petra grabbed the mirror and turned it to catch the rising sun. The reflected light was brilliant, impossible to miss. She aimed it at the Navy flagship and began signaling in the naval code every lighthouse keeper knew. King, present. Mercenaries, false. Flag. She repeated it 3 times, then shifted to the enemy vessels and sent a different message. Surrender. Navy. Present. Resistance. Futile. For a long moment, nothing happened. The 2 fleets continued their approach, cannons ready, both sides preparing for battle. Then, from the Navy flagship, a signal lamp flashed. Identify. King. Idris stepped forward. Even at this distance, even covered in salt and grime, he looked every inch a king. He raised his hand, and the shift took him. Not fully, that would have been too dangerous. But enough. His features sharpened, his canines lengthened, and his eyes blazed pure gold, catching the sunlight like beacons. Petra turned the mirror, reflecting his transformed face toward the Navy ships. The response was immediate. The Navy fleet changed course, turning to flank the enemy vessels. Signal lamps flashed, acknowledged, moving to extract. The enemy ships realized their deception had failed. 3 of them broke formation, trying to flee. The others, surrounded and outgunned, ran up white flags. It was over. Petra lowered the mirror, her hands shaking. Around her, the others were cheering, embracing, celebrating their survival. Idris shifted back to human and turned to her. "Brilliant," he said simply. "Lighthouse keeper trick. Signal mirrors are standard equipment. Not the mirror, you. Seeing what needed to be done and doing it without hesitation." A launch was being lowered from the Navy flagship. Within the hour, they'd be picked up, taken to safety, and then the real work would begin. Proving Hammersmith's involvement, dealing with the political fallout, navigating the scandal that would follow. But for now, standing on a windswept rock with the sun rising over the sea, Petra allowed herself to feel victorious. She'd survived the lighthouse, survived the mob, survived the ambush, and she'd done it not by hiding, not by submission, but by using the skills she'd honed in 6 years of isolation. Observation, quick thinking, understanding the patterns of wind and water and human nature. "What happens now?" she asked. Idris looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip. "Now," he said, "we go home, and we show the kingdom what a lighthouse keeper can do." The Navy launches reached the island an hour later. The captain of the flagship, a stern woman named Admiral Torrance, took one look at Idris's bedraggled state and immediately ordered her crew to provide clean clothes, hot food, and a full medical examination. "Your Majesty," she said, her tone making it clear she was not happy. "What in the 7 hells possessed you to swim to the widow's teeth in the middle of the night?" "Tactical necessity," Idris replied calmly. "You're the king. You don't do tactics. You have people for that." "Apparently, I have a lighthouse keeper for that now," he gestured to Petra. "Admiral, meet my new Royal Lighthouse Coordinator. She's the one who organized our escape and the signal that brought you here." Torrance's sharp eyes assessed Petra. "You're the one from all the scandal sheets." "Guilty." "Did you seduce the king?" "No, ma'am." "Shame. Might have improved his disposition." But there was approval in the Admiral's expression. "You did good work today, Coordinator. That mirror signal was textbook." "Thank you, Admiral." "Don't thank me yet. You're still going to face an inquisition when we get to Port Severin. Half of Parliament thinks you're a foreign agent. The other half thinks you're an opportunist. Nobody thinks you're qualified for the position the king gave you." "Then I'll prove them wrong." Torrance smiled, sharp and approving. "I like her, Your Majesty. Try not to get her killed." The voyage back to Port Severin took 6 hours. The damaged frigate limped along behind, Captain Reeves having successfully kept it afloat despite taking heavy damage. The 7 enemy ships were now in Navy custody, their crews arrested and awaiting interrogation. Petra spent most of the voyage in the cabin Torrance had assigned her, trying to make herself presentable. It was a losing battle. Salt water had done terrible things to her hair, her skin was windburned and scraped, and her borrowed clothes fit poorly. She looked like a refugee, which, she supposed, she was. A knock at the door. Cassandra entered without waiting for permission, carrying an armload of fabric. "The Admiral sent these. Figured you'd need something better than sailors' cast-offs for your arrival." She laid out a dress, simple but well made, in a deep blue that reminded Petra of the sea at dusk. There were also practical things, sturdy boots, a warm cloak, undergarments that actually fit. "I can't accept these," Petra said. "You can, and you will. The entire capital is going to be watching when we dock. You need to look like a royal coordinator, not a drowned rat." Cassandra paused. "No offense." "None taken." Petra touched the dress fabric. It was the nicest thing she'd owned in years. "Cassandra, what's really waiting for me in Port Severin?" The warrior woman sat on the edge of the bunk. "Honestly, a fight. Hammersmith has allies, powerful ones. They'll use every tool they have to discredit you, dig up every mistake you've ever made, paint you as the villain in this story. So nothing's changed from the lighthouse, except the scale." "Basically," Cassandra grinned, "but here's the thing, you've already survived the worst they could throw at you. The isolation, the mob, the ambush, and you're still standing. That scares them more than any army the king could muster." "Why?" "Because you're proof that their system doesn't work, that someone can rise from nothing without noble blood or political connections and succeed on merit alone. You're dangerous, Petra, not because of what you are, but because of what you represent." Petra looked at her reflection in the small mirror, saw the scars, the weathering, the signs of 6 years spent alone in the elements. "Good," she said quietly. "Let them be scared." Port Severin appeared on the horizon at sunset, its towers and spires golden in the dying light. The harbor was crowded with ships, and as they approached, Petra could see crowds gathering on the docks. Word of their arrival had spread. "Ready?" Idris asked, appearing at her shoulder. He'd cleaned up as well, now dressed in proper royal attire, but his eyes were the same, gold and warm and entirely focused on her. "No, but I'm going anyway." He smiled. "That seems to be your approach to everything." "It's worked so far." The ship docked, and the gangplank was lowered. Idris descended first, and the crowd roared. Cheers and jeers mixed together, impossible to distinguish individual voices. Then it was Petra's turn. She walked down the gangplank with her head high, ignoring the shouts, the accusations, the questions hurled from 100 mouths. At the bottom, Idris waited, his hand extended. She took it. The crowd's noise intensified, but Petra didn't care. She stood beside the king on the dock of Port Severin, salt-stained and exhausted and absolutely done with hiding. "Citizens of Port Severin," Idris's voice cut through the chaos. "I present to you Petra Halford, Royal Lighthouse Coordinator and the woman who saved my life. 3 times now, if we're counting." The crowd quieted, listening. "She will assume her duties immediately. Any lighthouse in this kingdom will answer to her. Any keeper will follow her protocols. And anyone," his eyes swept the crowd, hard as stone, "anyone who attempts to harm her or interfere with her work will answer to me personally." Silence. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a single voice. "3 cheers for the lighthouse keeper!" It was Captain Reeves, limping off his damaged ship, his face battered but grinning. "Hip, hip! Hooray!" A few voices scattered. "Hip, hip! Hooray!" More now, the sound growing. "Hip, hip, hip! Hooray!" Not everyone joined in, but enough did. Enough that when Petra looked out over the crowd, she saw not just hostility, but curiosity, respect even, from some corners. She'd made it. Against all odds, through storm and siege and battle, she'd made it to Port Severin, and this time she wasn't alone. The cheers were still echoing across the harbor when a carriage pulled up, black and gilded, bearing the royal crest. A footman opened the door, and Petra found herself ushered inside before she could protest. Idris climbed in after her, followed by Cassandra, and they were moving through the streets of Port Severin before Petra had fully processed that she was no longer on the ship. The city pressed in around them, buildings 3 and 4 stories high, streets packed with people and carriages and vendors hawking everything from fish to flowers. It was overwhelming after 6 years of nothing but sea and sky and stone. "You'll get used to it," Idris said, watching her face. "Will I?" "Probably not. I've lived here most of my life and I still hate the crowds." The carriage climbed through increasingly wealthy districts, the buildings growing grander, the streets wider. Finally, they passed through an iron gate and into the palace grounds. Petra had seen the palace from a distance, of course. Every lighthouse keeper knew the silhouette of the capital's skyline. But up close, it was something else entirely. White stone that seemed to glow in the twilight, towers that pierced the sky, gardens that could have held her entire lighthouse 3 times over. "It's too much," she said quietly. "It is," Idris agreed. "But it's home. Or as close as I've got." The carriage stopped before a side entrance. They were ushered through corridors filled with servants and courtiers, all of whom stopped to stare at Petra with varying degrees of curiosity and hostility. She kept her chin up and her eyes forward, following Cassandra's lead. They ended up in a suite of rooms that was larger than the entire lighthouse. A sitting room, a bedroom, a private bath with actual hot water piped in from somewhere below. There was a wardrobe already stocked with clothes in her size, and a writing desk positioned by the window overlooking the gardens. "This is too much," Petra said again. "This is standard for a royal coordinator," Cassandra said. "Actually, it's on the small side. Hammersmith has twice the space." "Speaking of Hammersmith," Idris said, his voice gone hard. "We need to deal with him. Tonight." "You don't have proof," Petra reminded him. "I will soon. Admiral Torrance is interrogating the mercenary crews. Someone will talk. They always do." A knock at the door. A servant entered, bowing. Your Majesty, Lord Chancellor Pembroke requests an immediate audience. He says it's urgent. Idris's jaw tightened. Tell him I'll meet him in my study in 10 minutes. The servant bowed and left. Pembroke is Hammersmith's ally, Cassandra said. Whatever he wants, it's not going to be good. Then I'll deal with it. Petra, rest. You've been through enough for one day. I'm coming with you. You don't have to. I'm the one they tried to kidnap. I'm the one they're using as a weapon against you. So yes, I'm coming. Idris looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. All right, but let me do the talking. Pembroke is a snake, and he'll use anything you say against you. Lord Chancellor Pembroke was waiting in the study, a thin man with gray hair and eyes like chips of ice. He didn't rise when they entered, which Petra knew was a calculated insult. Your Majesty, he said, his tone making the honorific sound like a criticism. I'm relieved to see you've returned safely. The entire kingdom has been in an uproar. I'm aware, Idris said, taking his seat behind the massive desk. Petra stood beside him, refusing the chair Pembroke gestured to. Cassandra positioned herself by the door. Yes, well, about that. Pembroke pulled out a document. Parliament has convened an emergency session. There are concerns about your recent decisions. Be specific. The appointment of Miss Halford to Royal Lighthouse Coordinator. The repeal of the Forbidden Coast Decree without consultation. Your public defense of a commoner over the advice of your counselors. The incident with the Duke of Hammersmith and the inkwell. He looked up. Shall I continue? By all means. There are those in Parliament who believe you've become unstable, that the stress of leadership has affected your judgment. They're calling for a competency review. The silence that followed was deadly. A competency review, Idris repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Of the king. It's within Parliament's authority, as outlined in the Constitution of Governance, Article 12, Section. I know the article. Idris stood, and Petra felt the shift ripple through him, not visible, but palpable. The air in the room seemed to thicken. And I know what this really is. Hammersmith trying to remove me because I won't play his political games, because I appointed someone on merit instead of connections. The Duke has nothing to do with this. The Duke hired 7 ships to kidnap my lighthouse coordinator, to use her as leverage against me. Admiral Torrance will have confessions within the day. Pembroke's expression didn't change, but Petra saw his knuckles whiten on the document he held. That's a serious accusation, Your Majesty. Do you have proof? I will. Then I suggest you present it before Parliament rather than making wild claims. The competency review is scheduled for 3 days hence. You'll have the opportunity to defend your actions then. He stood. Until that time, Parliament has voted to suspend any further appointments or decrees. Just a precaution, you understand. He left before Idris could respond. Petra watched the door close, then turned to find Idris gripping the edge of his desk so hard the wood was cracking under his fingers. They can't actually remove you, can they? She asked. If enough of Parliament votes for it, yes. They can declare me unfit and install a regent. Usually one of the royal family, but Hammersmith's faction has been pushing for expanded parliamentary powers. They could appoint one of their own. Then we need those confessions. Torrance is working on it, but interrogation takes time. And these are professional mercenaries. They know how to stay silent. Petra thought about the 7 ships, the coordinated attack, the careful positioning. They know how to stay silent for money, so we offer them something better than money. Like what? Their lives. And their freedom. She turned to Cassandra. The penalty for attacking a royal ship is execution, correct? Or life imprisonment in the work camps. Same difference, really. So we offer them a deal. Full confessions in exchange for reduced sentences. Exile instead of execution. A chance to live. Idris was already moving to the door. Cassandra, get me Admiral Torrance. Now. The interrogations took all night. Petra wasn't allowed to participate. Technically, she had no official role in military justice. But she waited in Idris's study, reading through reports on the Lighthouse network that someone had helpfully left for her. The reports were damning. Of the 43 lighthouses along the coast, 15 were operating below standard. 6 had been without keepers for months, relying on automated systems that failed regularly. 3 had suffered major structural damage that hadn't been repaired. The entire system was falling apart due to bureaucratic neglect and budgetary indifference. No wonder ships were being lost at triple the historical rate. Petra was making notes on what needed immediate attention when Cassandra entered, looking grimly satisfied. We have 3 confessions, all pointing to the Duke of Hammersmith. He hired the mercenaries, gave them your description, told them to take you alive and hold you until he sent word. What was his plan? Force the king to negotiate for your release. Make him look weak. Use it as proof that he was unfit to rule, too emotionally compromised by a commoner to make rational decisions. Petra set down her pen. He was going to use me to destroy Idris. Yes, but we have proof now. Signed confessions from 3 separate sources. The king is with Pembroke right now, presenting the evidence. Will it be enough? Cassandra's expression was hard to read. Ask me tomorrow. Petra couldn't sleep. She paced her rooms, watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about everything that had brought her here. The storm, the king in the water, the mob on the beach, the battle at sea. 6 years ago, she'd volunteered for the lighthouse to escape a world that seemed to have no place for her. And now that world was demanding she step back into it, with all its politics and danger and impossible complications. She could refuse, could walk away from the position, from Idris, from all of it, go back to being a simple keeper somewhere quiet. Except she couldn't, because she'd seen those reports, seen the evidence of lives lost because no one was paying attention, because the lighthouse system had been forgotten just like she'd been forgotten. Someone needed to fix it. And apparently, that someone was her. Dawn came gray and cold. Petra dressed in one of the new outfits, practical trousers and a jacket, more suited to inspecting lighthouses than court functions, and went looking for breakfast. She found the kitchens through trial and error, navigating the palace's labyrinthine corridors. The cook, a formidable woman named Agnes, took one look at her and started piling a plate with eggs, bread, and something that might have been sausage. "You're the lighthouse keeper," Agnes said. It wasn't a question. "I am." "Good. About time someone shook things up around here. This place has been dying of politeness and propriety." She pushed the plate across the counter. "Eat. You look half-starved." Petra ate, and it was the best meal she'd had in 6 years. Real food, cooked fresh, with actual flavor. "Agnes?" she said between bites. "What do people in the palace think about me?" The cook considered. "Half think you're a scheming hussy who seduced the king. Quarter think you're a foreign agent sent to destabilize the monarchy. Other quarter think you're the best thing that's happened to this kingdom in a generation." "Which quarter are you in?" Agnes smiled. "I think you pulled a drowning man from the sea and got punished for it. And I think you're either very brave or very stupid to stay and fight instead of running. Haven't decided which yet. Ask me tomorrow." The competency review was held in the Grand Chamber, a circular room with tiered seating that reminded Petra unpleasantly of an arena. Parliament sat in the upper tiers while the king's chair was positioned in the center, alone and exposed. Petra watched from a gallery reserved for royal staff, squeezed between Cassandra and Captain Reeves, who'd insisted on attending despite his injuries. Lord Chancellor Pembroke opened the proceedings with a speech about duty, stability, and the sacred responsibility of leadership. Then he began listing Idris's supposedly questionable decisions, starting with the appointment of a woman of no rank or proven ability to a position of significant authority. Petra's hands clenched on the railing. Idris let him talk, sat perfectly still in his chair, his expression neutral, while Pembroke and his allies painted him as impulsive, reckless, emotionally compromised. Then it was Idris's turn to speak. He stood, and the room went silent. "Lord Chancellor, members of Parliament, you've accused me of poor judgment, of making decisions without proper consideration. Let me address each accusation in turn." He pulled out the confessions, reading excerpts that detailed Hammersmith's plot. The chamber erupted in shouts and denials, but Idris spoke over them, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The Duke of Hammersmith hired mercenaries to kidnap my lighthouse coordinator, not because she was unqualified, not because she was a threat to the kingdom, but because she represented something he couldn't control, someone who rose on merit instead of birth or bribery." He looked directly at Pembroke. "You want to question my judgment? Question this. I forgot about Petra Halford for 6 years. Left her isolated and alone because I was too busy, too distracted, too certain that the details would handle themselves. That's the judgment you should be reviewing, not the fact that I'm trying to fix my mistake. Pembroke tried to respond, but Idris wasn't finished. As for emotional compromise, you're right. I am emotionally invested in this, because Keeper Halford saved my life. Because she showed me that duty and competence matter more than politics and connections. Because when 7 ships attacked us, she was the one who saw the truth and organized our escape, while trained military officers were still preparing to fight a losing battle. He gestured to the gallery where Petra sat. That woman spent 6 years maintaining a perfect operational record under conditions that would have broken most of you. She faced a mob without flinching, survived an assassination attempt, and she did it all while half the kingdom was calling her a whore and demanding her execution. The chamber was silent now. So yes, Idris said quietly, I appointed her royal lighthouse coordinator. And I'd do it again, because she's earned it. And if that makes me unfit to rule in your eyes, then perhaps you should find yourself a different king. He sat down. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the Duke of Hammersmith stood, his face purple with rage. This is absurd. Those confessions are coerced. The mercenaries would say anything to avoid execution. They also provided financial records, Admiral Torrance said, standing from her seat in the military section, showing payments from accounts controlled by you, Your Grace. Would you like to explain why your personal funds were used to hire 7 warships? Hammersmith sputtered, but he had no answer. The vote was called, not on Idris's competency, but on Hammersmith's arrest for treason. It was nearly unanimous. Guards escorted the Duke from the chamber, still protesting his innocence. Pembroke sat frozen in his seat, clearly calculating whether to distance himself from his fallen ally or go down with him. Idris stood again. Are there any other concerns about my judgment the council would like to address? Silence. Then this review is concluded. And let me be clear. Any further attempts to use political maneuvering to undermine legitimate appointments will be treated as obstruction of royal authority. I don't care if you like my choices, but you will respect them. He left the chamber, and after a moment's hesitation, Petra followed. She found him in a small courtyard, breathing hard, his hands shaking slightly. That was incredible, she said. He laughed, sharp and bitter. That was terrifying. I nearly lost everything. But you didn't. Because you were right. Because your plan worked. Because... He turned to her. Because you keep saving me, over and over. You saved yourself. I just provided tactical support. Petra. He stepped closer. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right. Do you want this position? Really want it? Or are you just accepting it because I offered and you felt obligated? She thought about the lighthouse, the isolation, the endless days of nothing but duty and waves. And she thought about those reports, the failing lights, the lost ships, the lives that could be saved if someone actually paid attention. I want it, she said, not because you offered it, but because it needs to be done, because I'm the one who can do it. Something in his expression eased. Good, because I need you, not just for this position, but... He stopped, searching for words. When you pulled me from the water, I thought you were just brave. Then I thought you were brilliant. Now I think you might be the only person in this kingdom who sees me as something other than a crown and a title. What do I see you as? Idris. Just Idris. The man who makes terrible decisions and throws inkwells at dukes and rows 40 miles in a storm because he can't stand the idea of leaving someone forgotten. Petra smiled. That is who you are. Is that enough? She understood what he was really asking, saw it in the way he looked at her, the way he defended her in the chamber, the way he'd risked everything rather than denounce her. Ask me tomorrow, she said, because she wasn't ready for this conversation. Not yet. Not when her world had changed so completely in the space of 2 weeks. He nodded, accepting the deflection. Tomorrow, then. The next 6 months were a blur of activity. Petra threw herself into reforming the lighthouse system with the same intensity she'd once devoted to maintaining her solitary beacon. She traveled the coast, inspecting every light, dismissing incompetent keepers, and promoting those who showed real dedication. She revised the supply protocols, increased the operational budgets, and instituted regular rotations so no one would have to endure what she'd endured. She also discovered she was good at this, not just the technical aspects, but the politics. The careful negotiations with port authorities, the budget presentations to Parliament, the endless meetings with merchants and naval officers who all had opinions about how the lights should be run. She learned to speak their language while never losing sight of what actually mattered. Ships safely guided, lives saved, duty fulfilled. Idris was there for most of it, not hovering, not interfering, but present, offering support when she needed it, backing her decisions when Parliament pushed back, occasionally pulling her away from work when she was in danger of burning out. They became friends. Real friends, in a way Petra hadn't experienced since her youth. They argued about policy and laughed over terrible palace food and sat in comfortable silence reading reports in his study. And slowly, carefully, they became more than friends. It started small, his hand on her back when she was too tired to stand straight, her fingers brushing his when they reached for the same document. The way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The way she looked at him when she knew he was. 6 months after her arrival in Port Severin, Petra stood on the balcony of her rooms, looking out at the city that had become, improbably, something like home. Below, the palace gardens were in bloom, and beyond them, she could see the harbor and the sea. She heard Idris enter but didn't turn. "I got your latest report," he said, joining her at the railing. "Lighthouse operational efficiency up 40%. Ship losses down by half. Parliament is actually impressed." "Don't sound so surprised." "I'm not. You've exceeded every expectation." He paused, "which is why I wanted to talk to you." Something in his tone made her turn. "The lighthouse at Starpoint is being decommissioned," he said. "It's too small, too isolated. We're building a new one 5 miles south with modern equipment and better positioning." "I saw that in the plans. What about it?" "The old lighthouse is being converted to a private residence. I thought—" He looked uncharacteristically uncertain. "I thought you might want it, as a retreat, somewhere to go when the politics gets too much." Petra stared at him. "You're giving me a lighthouse. If you want it, I know it's not the same as the Forbidden Coast, but it's perfect." The words came out thick with emotion she hadn't expected. "Idris, it's perfect." He smiled, relief evident. "There's one condition." "Of course there is. I get visiting rights, regular visiting rights, none of this 6-year isolation nonsense." "I think I can accept that." They stood together in the twilight, close enough that Petra could feel the warmth of him, smell the scent of pine and snow that clung to him even in human form. "Ask me again," she said quietly. "What?" "What you asked me 6 months ago, in the courtyard. Ask me again." Idris turned to face her fully. "Petra Halford, am I—" He stopped, started over. "Is there any possibility that you could want more than friendship from the man who forgot you existed for 6 years and has been apologizing ever since?" "Yes," she said simply. "Because that man rode 40 miles in a storm to apologize. Because he defended me in front of Parliament. Because he gave me work that matters and respected my ability to do it. Because he's trying every day to be better than he was." "And is that enough?" She thought about all the tomorrows she'd promised, all the deflections and delays while she figured out if this was real or just proximity and circumstance. "Ask me tomorrow," she said, and then she kissed him before he could look disappointed. This time, the kiss wasn't a question. It was an answer. One they'd both been circling around for months, too cautious or too afraid to voice. When they finally broke apart, Idris was smiling in a way that made him look years younger. "So," he said, "tomorrow then?" "Tomorrow." Tomorrow came, and the day after, and the day after that. Petra continued her work, reforming the lighthouse system, saving lives, proving every day that merit mattered more than birth. And Idris continued his work, ruling the kingdom with Petra at his side. Not as a queen, not yet, but as a partner who challenged him and supported him and never let him forget the cost of negligence. The scandal sheets eventually moved on to other stories. The protesters found new causes. Even Pembroke eventually accepted that Petra wasn't going anywhere and learned to work with her rather than against her. A year after leaving the Forbidden Coast, Petra stood in the lamp room of her new lighthouse at Starpoint. It was smaller than the old one, more modern, with an automated beacon that required only weekly maintenance, but it was hers. She'd come here alone, needing a few days away from court politics and budget meetings. Idris had wanted to join her, but she'd convinced him she needed the solitude. She lasted 2 days before she missed him. The third day, she heard a boat approaching, went to the window and saw a familiar figure rowing through calm waters. No storm this time, just steady strokes toward her shore. Petra met him at the door. "You couldn't stay away," she said. "3 days without you is 2 days too many." He kissed her, salty from sea spray, warm despite the cool air. "I have news." "Good or bad?" "That depends on your perspective." He pulled out a document. Parliament has proposed a new law, the Merit Appointment Act. It would codify the principle that government positions should be filled based on qualification and performance rather than birth or connection. Petra took the document, scanning it quickly. "They're using me as the example." "You're the proof that it works. If Parliament passes this, it will change everything. Open positions to people who've been shut out for generations." "And you think it will pass?" "I think you'll make sure it passes. You've already changed their minds about what's possible. This is just making it official." Petra looked at the document, then at the man who'd brought it to her. The king who'd forgotten her and spent every day since trying to make it right. "Idris," she said, "I need to tell you something." "That sounds ominous." "I love you." The words came out simple and clear. "I've been avoiding saying it because it seemed impossible. A lighthouse keeper and a king, but we're more than that now. We're partners. Equals. And I love you." His smile could have lit the whole coast. "Petra Halford, I have loved you since you pulled me from the water and then yelled at me for 6 years of isolation. Possibly before that. Possibly the moment I saw you running into a storm without hesitation. That's impractical. So is rowing 40 miles in a dinghy. We're both terrible at practical." She laughed, and he kissed her again. And for a moment, everything was perfect. "So," Idris said eventually, "what happens now?" Petra looked out at the sea, steady and eternal, no longer forbidden, but free. Looked at the lighthouse, her lighthouse, standing guard over safe passage. Looked at the man beside her who'd given her everything she'd needed to prove herself. "Now," she said, "we go back to Port Severin. We pass that law. We keep making the kingdom better. Together. That's a lot of work. I spent 6 years alone doing a job no one cared about. This is easy. You're extraordinary. I'm a lighthouse keeper who got a second chance, and I'm not wasting it." They stayed at Star Point for another week, working during the day and watching the beacon turn at night. When they finally returned to Port Severin, it was together, equals in every way that mattered. The Merit Appointment Act passed 3 months later, with Petra testifying before Parliament about what she'd accomplished and what others could accomplish given the same opportunity. The lighthouse system continued to improve. Ship losses dropped to historic lows. Other kingdoms began requesting Petra's advice on their own coastal protections. And through it all, Idris remained at her side, not as her superior, but as her partner. The king and the keeper, reshaping a kingdom one careful decision at a time. 2 years after pulling a drowning man from the sea, Petra stood on a balcony overlooking Port Severin Harbor, watching the lights come on across the city. Each one a beacon, each one a promise of safe passage. Idris joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Regrets?" he asked. She thought about the forbidden coast, the isolation, the 6 years of nothing but duty and waves. "None," she said. "Every choice led here. To this. To you." "Even the bad choices?" "Especially those. They taught me what mattered." In the harbor below, a ship was entering port, guided by the lighthouse beam that swept across the water, just like Petra had done 1,000 times, keeping ships safe, keeping people safe, doing the job that needed doing. She'd been forgotten once, had spent 6 years invisible and alone, but she wasn't forgotten anymore, and she never would be again. The lighthouse keeper had found her way home, not to isolation, but to purpose, not to loneliness, but to love. And every night, from the Forbidden Coast to Star Point to a dozen lights between, the beacons burned, steady and true and bright, just like her.